it's a good question, but you will find from practice that that doesn't happen. And the reason it maybe doesn't happen is something called state-dependent learning. So when you are remembering, when you're remembering that shopping list, you're not just remembering the shopping list, you're remembering the shopping list in a situation, you know, a bodily sensation, a time of day, radio in the background. So there's a set of, your memories become kind of stuck on the windscreen of the current situation, so that if you were next week, these cues won't have been there, and so these help distinguish next week's shopping list from this week's shopping list. It's a funny way the memory works. Now, if you think about it, depending on the job you have, you can meet hundreds of people every day, but you remember well the people you've maybe met that day around a table. But you then meet a completely different group next week, but that doesn't tend to interfere with them because the situations are different. So every time you learn something, you're in a new situation. If you have a few pints and you study for an exam, you'll do terribly in the exam unless you take a few pints during the exam. So I wouldn't recommend this as a course of action, but it's called state-dependent learning. So it's the state of your mind, of your environment, of your body, that learning is kind of embedded within that. And so the shopping lists are somewhat protected by state-dependent learning.
I'll just ask you, you know the survey in America with the 3-year-olds and their language skills?
Yeah.
What is the main reason for the difference between their vocab?
I didn't do this. This was people in the States. It was a huge study. The main reason were the number of interactions they had with the adults who were bringing them up, the length of the interactions, verbal interactions, and the quality of these interactions. So just the observations were that, for instance, the mother or the father just wouldn't speak as many times to the child as someone from a less deprived home, to the extent that it was 13 million to 45 million when you totted it up over 3 years.
Would they not be watching more telly and they would see, hear more language on television?
That's an interesting point. The difference between language from a television and language from an adult is the language from the adult is usually fitting into something that you are doing or saying. So it's a response usually, or if it's not, then it can become in the next utterance a response. So it's that interactivity of the language which has the brain shaping potential that a non-tailored utterance from the television. It's directed at the child and it's consequential for the child. So the brain works very much by, we learn by experience and we learn by mistakes and we learn by the consequences of what we do. So if we fall off a bike once, we're much less likely to fall off again. That experience. So if someone says something to us about something we are currently attending to, if you're a child currently attending to something and someone says red box, that's an incredibly powerful intersection of what your brain is currently attending to and a piece of information that comes at a point when your brain is open to being shaped, because attention is the royal road to learning. So we largely, not exclusively, learn what we attend to, and our brain is only physically shaped by experiences to which we're attending. That's one reason we can't learn at night when we're sleeping. That's the reason, if we're, watching television while we try and study, we don't learn very much, except for small intervals. So attention is a kind of something that prepares our brain for learning. So when a child is attending to something, or when an adult is attending to the child, that will engage attention. It's like opening a gate for the brain to be changed.
I think most memory is on like building blocks. You know, you can sort of remember, some people don't remember, say, more than 20 people in a period of
Yeah.
decades, but other people remember, say, maybe, 200 or 300 people and have a picture of each person
Yeah.
to mind, but usually they start something small and
Yeah.
compounds upon, and it becomes a building block.
Yeah.
And I think most memory is like a building block,
Mm.
and that you basically take snapshots
Yeah.
very often,
Yeah.
and you actually then accumulate all that in one group.
Oh, that's very, yeah. So the notion of memory as a building block is a very nice one, and the notion of snapshots is a very nice one, because sometimes you think, oh, I can't remember anymore, my head's full. But that's not the way memory works, because there are more potential memories are patterns of connections between cells in the brain, and there are more computationally there are more potential combinations of connections between the billions of neurons in the brain than there are stars in the universe. It's an enormous number of patterns. So there's no real limit to the number of things you can remember. And in fact, memories cluster together and stick to each other with connections. And in fact, you're right that if you get in the habit of remembering things or people, and particularly if you use the visual, if you make a point of using the visual systems of the brain as well, indeed it can be building blocks, and you can assemble a very good capacity for memory. But the other thing about memory is the more you do active processing of information, the more you will remember something. So if I get you to remember, if I was to read out a list of things I wanted you to remember, nail, car, cloud, beetroot, etc., and then got you to remember them, you would remember on average maybe half of them. But if I first of all said to you, I want you to classify each object into categories like tool, adjective, vegetable, that act of classification processes the information more deeply and you remember it better. And the same would be true of faces. You'll remember faces more. Sometimes this may be why women can be better sometimes at remembering people, because they show more interest sometimes than men. And they show more interest, they maybe look at them more, and they attend to them, and that is all cognitive operations being done on that information, which makes it much more memorable and easy to retrieve later on.
Okay, we have a question from the back here. Do alcohol, caffeine and other drugs cause irreparable damage to brain function, even if consumption is discontinued?
Caffeine doesn't damage the brain, as far as I know. In fact, caffeine slightly, in the short term, will enhance your certain attentional functions. Alcohol, fortunately, except in very severe cases, sometimes in very severe alcohol problems, you can get something called Korsakoff psychosis, where a whole particular parts of the memory system, the mammillary bodies, actually get damaged. That's in fact as much related to a vitamin deficiency caused by the alcohol. But in most cases, the cognitive impairments you get from alcohol can be recovered to a large extent. So that would be the good news. Yeah.
Yeah, that's good news. So, if anyone has questions at the back, you can always write a note and pass it forward if you.
You mentioned at the beginning that people with better confidence in themselves learn better. Do you think it should be a duty of the schools to raise confidence in the children?
It's a very good question. I do think that schools should raise confidence, although it's a very difficult thing to do. And there have been various programs in the States trying to raise self-esteem, and it hasn't had necessarily a huge effect. What I was talking about in particular was not specifically confidence, but rather the belief that you have some control over your mental capacities. So if you buy into an idea that your mental capacities are somehow endowed, then that means a number of things, but it means you can't improve them. Or if they're already quite high and you think they're quite high, the danger is that if you don't achieve the expectations that you believe pertain to these high intellectual abilities, you can end up being depressed. And I can remember myself when I was practicing clinically many years ago, when I was training, in fact, seeing a family come in, and there was a young boy of 15 or 16, and there was terrible family problems. And it turned out that the reason was he had gone to a Mensa event and was told he had an exceptionally high IQ on the basis of one of the Mensa tests. It's the worst thing you can tell someone you've got a very high IQ, because the consequences of that, now that boosts your confidence, okay? But the implication of that is, I don't have to do anything. I'm clever. And also, I'm very clever, therefore I must succeed. And we know in life that actually IQ doesn't predict, well, certainly up until an IQ of about 120, after that, IQ doesn't predict success in life. Creativity and ability to get on with other people and perseverance and ability to tolerate stress are much more important factors in predicting success. So you have to be careful about what you say to people, and it can be a terrible sentence to get someone and tell them your IQ's high. And Carol Dweck, the Stanford lady, did a very nice study showing the very negative effects of praising children for being clever. Don't praise them for being clever, because you're praising them for something and reinforcing an idea that they are somehow, how clever they are has nothing to do with their effort. So you praise them for effort, and you praise them for trying, and you praise them for perseverance, but don't praise them for being clever. It's like praising them for being tall. Okay? So, yeah.
The 10,000 hours thing.
Yeah.
Is that like true? Is that like, say, does that apply equally to someone in their 80s, to someone in their 20s,
Yeah.
or whatever?
No, I'm glad you asked that. I don't want to be too much of a Pollyanna. You're never going to get an 80-year-old to become a Mozart, even if they spend 10,000 hours doing it. You'll never get, you probably to become a Mozart, you'll have to start very young. Why is that? It's because your brain is much more plastic when you're young. Your brain is much more readily shaped by experience. And the downside of that is things like neglect and abuse in early childhood can have terrible lifelong effects, because the brain is so much more vulnerable to these effects then. So there are upsides and downsides. The brain is hungry for learning, but also more vulnerable to terrible bad things or neglect of stimulation. So as you get older, at my age, my brain is much less plastic than it was when I was 18, but I can still, as I will do, I promise, learn a foreign language this year, as we all should. We should all learn, not foreign language, we should all learn new things all the time. In the same way as we should all keep physically fit and active. If you want to keep your body fit, you have to keep exercising. If you want to keep your mind fit, you have to keep exercising. But you know, the benefits or the degree to which you can excel will be will become somewhat reduced as you get older. But you asked me earlier about learning a musical instrument, and there tends to be a belief that, if you haven't learned it by the time you're 20 or 30 or 40, you won't be able to learn it. And that is a misconception that stems from the fact that, yes, to get optimal, best performance, because your brain is most plastic, you should start when you're young. But plenty of people can become fine performers. Okay, not the very top, not maybe what they could have become had they started younger, but you can learn anything at any age. It will take you longer the older you are because your brain is less plastic.
There's a couple of people at the back. I don't know if I can get to you with the mic, but if you want to step forward a bit.
Very important woman once.
Came all the way down.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you very much. I'm really enjoyed the talk. It was
Thank
very
you. Thank you.
interesting. We have just moved to Ireland, my son and I, and what strikes me, just given what you've said in response to previous questions about learning and how we learn with emotion and affect and confidence, I am staggered at the different curriculum here for young children in schools from South Africa. Now, I don't know if you know much about educational psychology.
Not really.
We were following an outcomes-based education program there. So no rote learning,
Yeah.
no times tables, no practicing writing. Doesn't really matter much if you don't spell correctly, as long as it sort of looks right, you know. Oh, very dodgy, I'm quite sure. But nevertheless, very, very different. Now, I'm interested to hear from you, because it sounds like that mode of teaching in South Africa endorses the confidence and the emotion and the sort of things that you're saying are really good for learning. But I'm pretty sure that the way the Irish are doing it is probably better. So I'd like your response to that.
Sorry, a bit slow on the up.
Your son's definitely better off in Ireland. There was a chap called Frank Smith who wrote. He worked in the States in a teachers' training college in the States. I've got his book at home, and as far as I can see, off the top of his head, he had a brainstorm one night, and he wrote a book on reading, which said, this is all. It was in the 70s, you know. It was all, hey man, this is all kind of fascist nonsense, imposing these heavy structural things, forcing kids to do this boring things. And he said, kids will naturally learn language if you expose them to books, and what you do is you just give them look and say. You're very unstructured, exactly as you've described. And that guy, 15, 20 years later, in all of the teacher training colleges in the United Kingdom, there was not a single lecturer specialized in the teaching of reading. And you had a nation of dyslexics created, 3 generations of dyslexics created. They're not just that, there was real dyslexia in the sense that their brains had not got the proper brain shaping, thousands of hours of shaping of They hadn't learned their times tables. So if you go into a shop, now to a certain extent it's happened here, if you go into a shop and ask someone, you know, two items, they'll go to the calculator. But so people of my generation, it's wonderful to say, can do mental arithmetic better and probably spelling better than people of you lot. So no, definitely. The idea that one should go for fuzzy, warm-hearted things like confidence. Now that's important, confidence, but you need to. It's like sending out Microsoft Word without some of the core software modules in it. You know, to have children not learning basic cognitive skills or tools like that.
Anybody else?
I have a question regarding an article I read, and I think it was really similar. It's a woman who wrote a book about the fact that there are two categories of people or children. The one who have a growing mindset, or they think what they have, and it's kind of she seemed to say that it's kind of natural, like some kind of genetic ability that they think they can grow their skills. And there would be 50% of children like that, and 50% of children who can't. And we think they can't, and then those would perform less at school. And she was saying as well, so I don't know where she got those figures, I don't know if you heard about it.
Yeah.
And then she was saying that when they grow older, and it seems that the school process actually, instead of improving, going to the good, the good trying to be more people into the growing mindset, will perform better, or they think they can do better. It's actually the contrary. With the school, there would be 1/3 of people who would think they are a growing mindset, and the 2/3 of them would just think they can't improve. So I don't know.
Yeah. I think that might be Carol Dweck. She's recently come out with a book on this, and it's about this beliefs about your abilities and what you attribute your abilities to, and it's very, very interesting research, and it's very important. I think it's important also for some people who, with other emotional conditions, some people, and there's a whole thing to do with biological interpretations of emotional disorders, that I suspect a similar thing pertains there, that if you believe you can't gain control of your own mood or anxiety, for instance, then you won't. And so these self-fulfilling prophecies are a factor there as well.
But it looks it goes the wrong way. There's more and more people as you get older
that
get in the wrong mindset.
Well, as I understand what you're saying is, it starts off 50-50, but then the people who believe they have who don't believe their efforts can affect their capacities, they deteriorate more, if you like, over time. Is that right? Or
there's more and more people.
More and more people believe that. Okay. So more and more people believe that, and that's an interesting question. I don't know why that is. Yeah. Sorry.
Well, you mentioned IQ tests and measuring ability a number of times. How objective and how useful do you think IQ tests are?
IQ tests are useful. They're particularly useful for, say, people who've been. You can find people who have not had the benefit of an education that has helped them, for instance, develop their language or their vocabulary, yet are very, very clever. And you can sometimes, they're very, very useful at cutting through the confidence and the verbosity that comes with an education, which may conceal not necessarily the top-notch intelligence. So they're quite a good way of getting a window into someone's true capacities who might not have confidence or not have the same fluency, verbal fluency. But like anything else, there's a certain limit to them, but they're not rubbish. And the thing is, one of the very interesting things about IQ is, in the last 100 years, it's steadily increased in the developed world. And that's a very interesting question of what it is has caused this increase. So, every generation has gone up about 10 points. And part of that may have to do with, for instance, the complexity of plots on television compared to Crossroads 30 years ago, which is very, that there are more demands being made on our brains in certain respects. Yeah. Yeah.
Sorry, I'll just take a question here.
Decided to sit down because I was too tall after your comment. I was just thinking about the first 2 points you made in your talk and how they could be open to different interpretations. And basically, the first one was about the 7th graders, and they were asked, "Do you believe there's a limit to your intelligence?"
No. No, okay. I'll tell you. They were asked.
Cicero, think of Cicero.
not as a limit. Do you believe you've got about that you're? I can get you the precise words. Hold on. Yeah. Excuse me a second. I'll just get the words there. It's very important, the words here. I know I've got them in my pocket. Jeez, oh.
You forgot.
Yeah. My wife's in the audience. I have to be very careful what I say about my memory because I'll be exposed as a charlatan. You have a certain amount of intelligence, and you really can't do much to change it. It's okay, right?
Okay. So,
Yeah.
so these science graders have got to this age, and there's a certain amount of intelligence. It's not that much.
Yeah.
Change.
Yeah.
And some of them aren't doing so well in school
Yeah.
already.
Yeah.
They're finding school quite tough. Now, maybe I'm misreading this. But there's some of them that feel they've got infinite opportunity ahead of them. They're learning and they're just soaking up like a sponge. Now, in 4 years' time, I would guess that the kids that were having difficulties in 7th grade won't be doing very well. And they'll be the people that have thought, God, I'm limited. God, I really can't do much better than I'm doing today. And the kids that thought they had an infinite ability, well, those are the kids who are bright anyway.
No.
And the other point you made about depression, I mean, if people feel that, the world's closing in on them and God, everything's going wrong, well, then you're going to be depressed, right?
Yeah.
But if you feel you've got infinite opportunity, well, I don't really see much option than not to be depressed.
Okay. No. Thank you. No, it's a very, very good point. As far as I understand about the children, these beliefs were independent of ability. So it wasn't the case that just the bright kids thought they were able to change and the less bright kids weren't. This was an independent variable. And some bright kids thought that they had been given a fixed amount of intelligence and there wasn't much they could do about it. And one consequence of that belief is you should just absorb the maths, for instance, the way you were supposed to absorb the reading, and it doesn't require effort and this kind of thing. So I think it's a very valid potential criticism. I think that Carol Dweck properly controlled for that in her studies. Regarding the depression, I am just struck by the lack of correlation between one person's "the world is closing into me" is another person's "there's a challenge and an opportunity for me." And some of the lowest levels of depression in the world are in the areas where, from our perspective, is the most awful objective circumstances. So China, for instance, now maybe changing now. China has 1/10 the rate of depression of America. America's got twice as much as Western Europe, and China has got about 1/10 of what America has, even though the circumstances, the objective environmental circumstances. So the feeling that the world is closing in, if you like, is not a kind of fixed reality necessarily. It's, if you like, a manifestation of an outlook on the world that can be a self-fulfilling one. Yeah.
But I mean, like Africans living in a village where everybody's starving, their idea of the world closing in is very relevant. Whereas if I'm in Ireland and the guy next to me is earning €100,000, then there's a relative belief that I'm doing a lot worse than he is.
Okay, so the comparison of the person, so that's a big problem in the Western capitalist world. Is people suffer kind of low mood because they're comparing themselves with the celebrities and the people who are doing really well. But if you think about it, that's not an objective reality. That's a frame of mind that could be flipped on its side. All you have to do is change your comparison. Say, my God, I'm earning 10 times as much as someone in an underdeveloped country. So it's not an inevitable thing. It's a cognitive set that one comes to assume. Yeah. Yeah.
Just take one for Judith. Just a very quick question. I read an article there in the Sunday Times. I think you commented in it just recently, just about all the how to stimulate the brain. And I'm just wondering, I'm actually quite interested in your opinion on the DX light and brain training and what you would think of that versus reading a book, just even your idea on that.
No, thank you. A very, very good question. if you said to me, I've got 2 hours on Sunday, should I play Nintendo DS, buy a puzzle magazine, play the piano, or read a book, or go to a demanding French film in the IFC, I'd say probably do one of the latter three, okay? However, if you say to me, I'm really tired on the way home in the train and I actually quite enjoy, it's fun to play Nintendo DS or to do puzzle magazines, I'd say it's got to be fun first. But if it's fun first and you're doing it primarily for fun, it's probably good for your brain to keep it stimulated, particularly if you're doing tasks that don't come easily to you. So maybe doing visuospatial tasks if you're good at word tasks, or not necessarily doing all the same. So the Dr. Kawashima games, I think it's a fantastic thing he has done, because he's made computers accessible and trendy to people who wouldn't use them before. He's given people an orientation to use. He's got them into stimulating their brain. So it's a bit like Jane Fonda and the kind of aerobic exercise in the 70s. You know, he's got people into to brain training. So the critical thing, I've got Robertson's 10 rules of brain training that I won't bore you with here, but the thing is, it's got to be fun. You've got to realize it doesn't prevent Alzheimer's disease. You mustn't do it as a chore. And there are many other things that are, if you can do and if you can stick at them, are better, like new learning, foreign language, musical instrument, etc. Yeah.
Guys, I'll take another 2 questions. Hi, I was just wondering, is there any theories regarding photographic memory? Does it exist, or what's different about the people who claim to have it and the rest of us who have to struggle to mentally map things slowly?
Yeah. It's a very photographic memory. It's a very interesting phenomenon, eidetic imagery, and it's certainly the case that there are big individual differences in which people can create mental images of things. You can probably foster that to a certain extent, but children have it to a much higher degree than adults, and it tends to get lost with a language-dominated curriculum when people go to school. So there was a famous autistic girl called Nadia who famously, there's a book of her drawings, wonderful, wonderful drawings. It looks like just photographic images of, she would look at something complex, beautiful one of a cockerel. But then, they got her to school and laboriously, gradually taught her language because she had no language, and she lost the ability. And was probably a good thing to do. But the language systems of the brain and these image-based systems are in competition to some extent. And you have to, and the language one, our culture tends to be quite strong, the education system tends to be quite strongly foster one. It's not that that's bad, it's just they could do. Einstein went to a school which had the explicit focus on imagery as the basis for thought, and Einstein suited that. He only went in his 6th year, but it suited him fine because he had said, words are not much good to me. Images are the stuff of my thought, and all these early thought experiments were image-based experiments. So, but to go back to eidetic imagery, it's controversial just how much like a photograph it is, but there are certainly some people, and certainly more children, who have that capacity to see a complex image and then read it off as if they were reading the real thing.
Sorry, it's a lot of questions there.
You commented twice about the non-prevention of Alzheimer's, but I thought that Alzheimer's is something that you can't actually prove that somebody has it until after they're dead in an autopsy.
That's right,
So
yeah.
How is that? How can you be
Okay.
very certain that?
Okay. The question about preventing Alzheimer's, I'm just very cautious. I don't want, the main thing, the reason I say that, well, first of all, the question is about diagnosis of Alzheimer's. Conclusive diagnosis of Alzheimer's can really only happen, as you're right, post-mortem. But there are and the only way to fully diagnose Alzheimer's is with a so-called consensus diagnosis by a multidisciplinary team in a memory clinic, where based on brain scans, cognitive assessments, interviews, and then it's a provisional diagnosis, and that's reasonably good. It's far from perfect, but the main reason I keep saying you can't prevent Alzheimer's is once the disease is in place, there's no evidence that any of these things I've been talking about will have any effect on it at all. That being said, people that keep physically active throughout their life, that have good diets, keep mentally stimulated, and who also a number of years education predict this, tend to have a lower rate of diagnosis of Alzheimer's. And I mentioned about social connections in older people actually correlate with a number of neurofibrillary tangles, which is one of the pathological signs associated with Alzheimer's disease. So the main thing, I just keep saying that about, the last thing I want is anyone who thinks they have Alzheimer's or anything like that, saying, oh, maybe there's a magic cure here. There isn't, unfortunately. A lot of neuroscientists in Dublin and elsewhere are working hard to try and find treatments for it, but at the moment we don't have them.
Okay, that's it. Thanks for a very positive talk. Actually, I got a lot of tips and improving your memory, and it's not all downhill and everything like that. It's great. And just got a little.
Oh, you're very kind. Thank you very much.
Chocolate.